joined here today by Mr. James Walker and Mr. Huw Price. James, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back. New year, new look. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's February actually. I'm not sure we can talk about the new year just yet. Feels slightly wrong.
All right, he's made it through dry January, so it's fine. Another year can start.
Now it can begin. It can absolutely begin. Thank you all for joining. We're going to be talking about some new messaging that we've got out, and we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that's kind of we see as of 2025, and maybe a few other sort of bits and bobs as we go through.
Can we talk about politics at all? There are a few challenges for 2025.
Well, we may stay away from that, but you never know. We'll see. We'll see where we end up. Huw, do you want to start us off? Give yourself an intro. Come on, tell people who you are, what you do. Here.
Yeah, I just looked at my LinkedIn profile the other day. Apparently, I'm the godfather of test data. I think the marketing team have been at my LinkedIn profile a bit. So, yeah.
That's very dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Anyway, so I've been in this space for a very, very long time. Started at S&P back in the 80s, where kind of got really interested in data for analytical purposes, and then moved more into kind of administering and trying to manage the chaos, which is the ever-evolving IT landscape, I suppose, over the last 40-odd years.
Fantastic. Mr. James, go on, give yourself an intro.
Yeah, I guess a little bit more recent than Huw. My data journey actually started more in academia. So I got very into machine learning, data visualization, which is where I kind of did a PhD. And then somehow met Huw at Swansea University, and he took me into his company at the time, Grid Tools, and taught me all about test data management. And here we are about 12 to 13 years later. So, yeah, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it's certainly been exciting.
Blink and you miss it, mate. Blink and you miss it. And I guess so. I'm Ben Riley. So my first introductions into the world of data was actually more around NHS healthcare support, trying to keep various sort of bits of the NHS working. And it was sort of, into the deep end when it comes to data, because there's a level of chaos there that I can't possibly talk about. And then, subsequently joined up with Huw and the gang. Also about 10, 12, 13, who knows, quite a while ago now. Right, let's get into it. So 2025, we're a month in. There's been all sorts of stuff in the AI space, new AIs coming out. There's been a couple of new sort of data regulations touted and various bits. Where do you want to start? What's sort of the main challenge in 25 that we think people get on top of now? They've got a chance of being successful. I don't know who wants to.
Well, let me start it off then, and then I think we're going to kind of just maybe talk through kind of our new thinking of this year, and we'll actually kind of launch some new messaging as well. And then maybe I'm going to push James quite hard on the AI stuff and how he thinks he can use it. I mean, we're sort of using it quite a lot already, but I think there's a lot of blue sky thinking that we could do here as well. So I mean, I think it's the sort of continuation of chaos in my mind. If you look at most organizations, again, every dinner party or cocktail party when I end up working with someone especially in business or even in IT, all they really talk about is the kind of just the avalanche of change that they're having to deal with, and they're also having to deal with all the old systems, and trying to glue them all together in some kind of coherent way. Just from a business point of view, forget the kind of IT land, which is kind of where we tend to specialize. It's just kind of overwhelming for people. They don't. Trying to gather it all up into something that's coherent, where they can then sort of make confident and sensible decisions about where they should be going in terms of the direction of their business. Because most companies know IT businesses. If you look at the health insurance company, banks, most of the spend is on IT, and that's where actually the complexity and actually, the difference between different banks is utterly extraordinary, and it's all directly related to their ability for their IT departments to evolve and change quicker. The other one is competition, which is that it's pretty easy now. There's a lot of open source stuff out there. There's some very good tech around now. I think it's got actually a lot better over probably the last 3 years. It was a little bit woolly before. And it's easy for challengers to come in and disrupt. And that is just scaring the bejesus out of, legacy companies, because these companies can just come out of nowhere. And what's the main problem is that they just haven't got this enormous, great dead weight of old systems, which are actually just chock full of data that they don't understand. Um, Obviously, the industry is incredibly fashion-led. The latest fashion is AI, which is great. It's fantastic. There's some really good stuff in there. It's very clever and it's very useful. Everyone's panicking as usual. But having all of this sort of new stuff in play, but how do they even approach it? As I was saying, I was talking to someone who'd approached one of the big AI vendors to say, right, we've got a ton of money, we want to pile into this, and they offered a ton of money to one of the vendors, and the vendor said, sorry, we can't really do enough because your data is just in not good enough shape and you don't really understand it, and we're basically going to be data scrubbing and mining and all this kind of stuff for ages and ages and ages, and they couldn't really go anywhere. So now they're all panicking. What do we do now? What do we do now? And I think that's kind of the sort of the flavor of stuff that's going on. I still think that there's this massive level of torpor and incompetence in our industry. Unlike many other industries, let's say it's probably one of the worst industries for people not really understanding what they're doing and trying to do something without firm understanding of where they are, firm understanding of where they want to go and how they're going to get there. So I still think that that's probably one of the big issues. I'm going to fill up in a minute. And then, this happens quite often where people are just so terrified of any kind of change because it's going to disrupt. And the reality is they don't really trust IT because they've made a change and they've buggered it up, basically. So I think that's kind of my feeling at the beginning of this year. James, what are your thoughts?
No, it's interesting. I mean, I fully agree with you on the AI. It is the buzzword at the moment. And if you look back, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, everyone was talking about business intelligence. That was the big thing. We need dashboards joining together all of our data. And the big challenge there, why a lot of BI projects failed, is exactly what you're saying. It's data understanding, right? If you can't understand your data, if you don't have a solid, understanding, you don't have a good catalog behind it of all the attributes, all the tables linking back to business terminology, all of these initiatives will just fall flat on their head because you're trying to make sense out of something which you don't understand, and that's not feasible, right? But I think if you dig deeper than that, what is the reason why people don't understand their data and how do they get into this mess? To me, it comes back to a couple of things. Yes, absolutely, there's legacy, and I don't think there's any way you can get around that. If you look at the big incumbents, there's always going to be legacy there, right? But the big challenge, I think, is just the complexity of the IT landscape that exists, the sheer number of applications. If you look at your average enterprise now, at minimum, they have about 3,000 different applications in their IT landscape. If you're in a central team or your team is responsible for governing that IT landscape, there's probably a handful of people in that team, right? 4 or 5 people at most. How are you meant to make sense and understand and gather all of that data together so that you have a good understanding and make it available across the enterprise? And I think that's really the core challenge, right? It's data understanding, but understanding data is really hard unless you have the right mechanisms, the right processes, and the right tools in place, right? Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, I agree, guys. Totally agree. I mean, it's a sort of a scale problem. And then to Hugh's point, I think there's also a people process thing that's associated to it that actually doesn't take long for you. You go away on holiday for a couple of weeks and you come back, and the amount of change that could have kicked off in one of your apps, let alone you got 100 that you're part of your team, 200 that's part of another team. Whenever you make changes, they're interrupting somebody else or breaking somebody else's world. How do you deal with that? So I guess that's the question, right? What can people do? What sort of if you were to offer some advice today to somebody listening who's got these sorts of problems, what's the first thing that you would sort of push to them to say, try and do this better or consider this maybe slightly differently? Huw, I'll start with you.
You speed it up beautifully. Whack the slide up there, Ben. Let's talk about the new messaging. There we go. Discover, act, monitor. James, you want to just kind of talk through the thinking? You were kind of heavily involved with the marketing team on this, and then I'll maybe add a little bit of war stories and
Yeah.
to it, maybe.
I think maybe just before we get into it, I mean, one of the core challenges I've seen in a lot of test data teams, and this is true across testing and software quality as well, actually, is a lot of teams will try to run before they can walk. And what I mean by that is, they will try and make data available, or they will try and apply some test data generation routine in there, like masking seems to be the hot topic, before any understanding of data has been made, right? And if you just go in there and you start blindly going about, applying these kind of routines and trying to make data available, 9 times out of 10, it just causes chaos. You end up with something that isn't a very positive result for the organization, right? So we've tried to take a step back here. And a lot of that is introducing kind of a framework to help organizations be more efficient with their test data, help organizations understand their test data, and help organizations really keep on top of their data as it changes over time. So what you're seeing here is it's a very simple framework. It's split out into 3 kind of core sections, I suppose: discover, act, and monitor. And discover is really a capability where we're saying we can help the organization take a step back, get a complete picture of their IT landscape, understand exactly what data exists. And that's not just databases, that's also applications. So that could be ERPs, it could be off-the-shelf software, it could be SaaS solutions, etc. Really at this stage, what you're saying is we're going to take a step back, understand all the data we have, right? Once you have a good understanding of that data, let's now act on it. Let's now use some of those insights we've gathered, understand what teams are kind of starved of data, what teams need to have data made accessible, and let's apply test data routines to make that data available to the enterprise, right? And that's your classic test data approaches, right? Masking, synthetic data generation, data modeling, subsetting, everything throughout it, right? But I think the core bit here as well is actually monitoring. As we know in IT, we've moved well beyond waterfall many years ago. Everyone's in the world of agile now. There's lots of incremental changes. Everyone's building, weekly, nightly, well, whatever your flavor is. And actually, as soon as you've discovered data, you have a good understanding of it, it's immediately out of date, right? Because all of a sudden the landscape has changed. So monitoring, I think, is actually really critical. How do we keep your IT landscape, your understanding of that landscape up to date? So monitor it, keep it up to date. And that's really the framework, right? Super simple: discover, act, monitor.
One of the things we spoke about a little while ago was that actually that discovery phase is it's a mixture of things, right? It's not just, can you put in some automation to go and find something interesting about your databases you're working with and so on and so forth. I think it's also just a bit of sort of discovery about the organization itself. Like, what are you doing today when it comes to sort of your data management? Is it, some masking and that's the end of it? Or is there sort of a real drive to try and, go a bit deeper? One of the things Huw mentioned the other day is first couple of days going on site for an implementation of sort of a data solution, really gathering up a lot of things that people are doing today and trying to work out, is that good, bad? Is that helping, or is it kind of harming? Right. And so I think that discovery portion takes on quite a big kind of level of, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and that sort of stuff, but actually what good stuff are you doing? How can we keep that going and repeatable? But also, what don't you know? Right? What can you put software in to kind of help at scale and do things?
I mean, I think it's actually, so yeah, you're right. First thing, you're probably doing something already, so let's gather that up. Now, the thing that we already have is a framework, and I think one of the big problems we have is that people don't really have somewhere a central place within an organization where you can go and look at data structures. Now, data structures are tables, fine. They're message structures, they're APIs, inputs and outputs, they're unstructured data. There's nowhere really central, and that really is a problem. If you're an engineer, everyone knows when you're building a bridge, you're going to those CAD/CAM drawings are all held centrally. Everybody understands when everyone goes to the central place. Due to the kind of fiefdoms that exist and the technologies that have come in over the years, they've had some IBM Rust, they've got bits of this, they've got Confluence, they've got a bit of Jira, they've got all this stuff. It's splattered all over the place. It's a complete shambles. So, great. So what we've done is we've said, okay, let's build up, and we've worked a long time on this. I tend to do a lot of the plumbing at the background. And we've actually spent an incredible amount of time trying to build a structure which is flexible enough to handle all these different data types and data structures and put them somewhere. And, once it's available via APIs if you want to integrate with your own stuff or through our portal. And we can put the stuff into that, and then you can monitor it and you can see it and you can add notes to it. Now, this is a fantastic opportunity where AI plays a really, really good part. We've already got it. If you look at some of the videos that James has done, all you have to really do is just say, fine, let's just scan these structures. Let's go and use AI to try and very, very quickly build up some metadata information so that we're not looking at the bitty-bytes of this. We're looking at actual business terminology. Now, you can go, if it's something like an ISO message, just go and point it at the URLs on the cloud. Bingo, fantastic. All the regulations is great. Alternatively, if you've got a bunch of Word documents, you've got Confluence pages, you've got Jira, we don't really care. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go off and harvest that up and give you something for the very first time in your organization, which is massive. I mean, I think this is probably the number one thing, an understanding in business terminology of what your data is. So I think that discover part, it's really clever, and it's a massive labor-saving device. I was being slightly hard on the IT industry. But the problem is you're moving so fast. Everyone's very feature-focused. Get that feature out the door. Get that feature out the door. No one ever really does documentation. No one, and we'll come to the monitor part of this later on. How you can kind of self-document the things. But this idea of being able to use AI to pay off that technical debt as quickly as possible. You don't need to do everything at once. What you can do is just let it do the basics fine. As you move through each project, you may then refine a little bit because you need it. You're working on it. It's right in front of your face. You're starting to understand those processes. And you're saying, well, this data actually, we can refine the descriptions of that data. So that discover part is now, with AI, it's finally attainable really quickly. And I mean, really quickly, within 1 to 2 sprints, you've got yourself a really good set of meta understanding of where you are, and you can't really go anywhere unless you know where you are. Okay. So
Yeah, I want to show one example of this actually. So this is quite interesting actually, just back on LinkedIn. But so we're doing some work with a customer at the moment on SAP ERP, which is a notoriously challenging system, I guess to say in a very PC way. If you ignore the stuff on the right here, if you look at the actual, this is RFC calls, but if you look at the actual underlying calls here, they're so weirdly named, like A002 or PA0020. Unless you're an absolute SAP wizard, you have no idea what these tables actually represent. Historically, you'd have to go away, look them up in some documentation, figure it out. But then, you get down into the column level and you're at these really weirdly named tables as well, right? And the level we're at now is you can connect to a system. So here we've connected into SAP. You can go and scan that system, understand what data's there. And you can actually go and say, hey, AI, go away and populate the descriptions for me. So actually, we've gone from something which is absolutely cryptic to actually having something which has, an English text that pretty much anyone can understand, right? And then you can take it one step further and you can say, hey, AI, now let me know if this data is sensitive. So here it's tagged it up with things like PII, PCI, healthcare information, etc. Right? And I think that's really the mission of what AI can do and where we're trying to head with it. I think you should just be able to connect to a data source and get value immediately. I think test data has historically been seen and perceived as this really scary beast. You've got to have all these PhDs and you've got to put vast amounts of time and effort in to even reap 1% of value into your teams. But actually now, if you look at the tooling, you look at what AI is capable of doing, it's very quick to get up to speed and start making data available and understood across the organization, right? And I think that's really the opportunity here that AI brings to the table.
one of the options. I see. So that's great. Ben, if you could put that slide up again. So the other thing then, once you've kind of got this meta understanding, so you manage to get that through in a sprint possibly, then you say, well, okay, let's actually start scanning the data. Let's actually start rummaging around inside that data. And again, what we do, we've already had these scanners which kind of do some pretty deep scanning already. Everyone thinks, oh, just scan all the data and it'll tell you what the business is, but as I keep saying, you've got 6 switches and they're on and off and they're in the correct and the order varies, which happens, of course, with messages. You've got more combinations than you can ever count. So you do need to kind of iterate through this, and AI is very good at that, being able to do that kind of iteration through. But once you've gone in and you've started to analyze that data and you've started to come up with distinct values and combinations of values and things like that, then you're slowly kind of extracting out you're moving more into kind of what does this data mean in terms of a business unit, things that are accessible. Then you come into this wonderful thing called coverage. Now, in IT, there's lots of bugs, blah, blah, blah. Most of the bugs come from, oh, right, we didn't have the right data. Oh, that bug was in production. I mean, how many times have you heard this? Yeah, and the number one reason that people click for a bug is that we didn't have the right data to test that. We didn't anticipate that in production. Therefore, the system came down, and we managed to bring down all of the test machines for 3 days. And these are the types of things. Now, once you start doing this level of understanding of data, then what you can then very quickly do, and if you look at kind of the modeling and some of the sort of orthogonal array type techniques and combinatorial testing and all this kind of stuff, and you can then actually start measuring the coverage and the density of the data in terms of how good is this going to be to exercise my code to make sure that my integration testing is testing enough variations, that it's testing enough bad data. I mean, which again is one of the big issues, is you don't do enough negative testing, then bad data makes it in. That bad data probably makes it halfway across your 100 systems, then it falls over, all hell breaks loose, and then you spend weeks and weeks trying to back this transaction out of there. So this right up front now, we're talking discovery now, before we've even gone in trying to make a change to code. You're actually rummaging around trying to build up these patterns and starting to measure the density. We've got quite nice spot diagramming tools. And what you're really looking for, again, maybe we could put some more AI on top of that and let it beaver away and look for gaps, and also the comparison. What you'll find in production data, which tends to be very boring and a lot of it, your development environment should be, sort of n times better than your production environments in terms of the density of variation of data. So that discover is not just about the metadata, it's about the understanding of those variations. And then you can get into modeling. And modeling is how do you model out these variations to start mapping them onto the business processes. But again, this is very much in the discover phase. But again, it's sort of vaguely free once you start loading in the AI and some of these cool scanning tools.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's just about being more proactive with your test data, right? I got very excited yesterday. We were talking with a customer, and they've been setting up a central automation service, which is great. I love that idea. I think that's brilliant. One of the core things that they said was the biggest blocker for them originally when they set up the service was data quality. Looking around, there's so much disjointed data where it exists in one system.
Oh,
for some reason I've disappeared, but now I'm back. Yeah,
you're
good.
back. You're good.
so hang on, just pick it up from where it
Yeah,
exists
so
in one
either
system.
upstream or downstream, that data just didn't exist. So that's a big fundamental referential integrity problem for data quality. And then the other piece there was just general data availability. The automation was falling over all the time because data became unstable or it wasn't there. So actually what they've started to do now is roll out a central dashboard across organizations where they can start to track their data discovery. Has that been part of the initial setup phase of the project? Is the data understood? Can we track quality from that? And actually, the benefits there are you're just setting yourself up for success, right? Instead of having these blockers later on in the project, you're addressing them early. You're doing a little bit more upfront work, but actually the result there pays dividends later on, right? So I think that's the core impact of where you can get to, I suppose.
I've got my slightly sort of whimsical example of this is, as part of this framework and part of our sort of latest release, I've been setting up sort of various demos, and I want to show people how this works, right? How does this work in action? So I took one of Huw's environments, one of his database environments, and I started to put some discovery on it, and I put the monitoring against it. So kind of keeping track what's going on over a couple of days, added a little bit of data into this database and so on and so forth. And then I got an email, sort of, I want to say it's like Tuesday-ish this week, and all the tables are gone, right? So all the tables have been removed. Huw'd gone in, I'm not sure what you're doing, right? But there were two views, or there were two other tables that you then added back in, and you're doing stuff. And although my stuff is just for demo, so it's like, if if I didn't know that, what would have happened is I'd have got on a call with, a prospect, a customer wanting to show these things off. I'd have gone in to have a look at something and it would all have changed, right? All of the tables have gone, all the structures would be different. My data growth would have changed from being quite a lot of data to now nothing because all the database has been deleted. And I had no idea, absolutely no idea. Now, you could say maybe I shouldn't be rummaging around in sort of some unknown database and all that sort of stuff. But it just shows, even in sort of things that you presume are going to be reasonably static or reasonably straightforward, it's not the case. And our scale is not particularly, I'm not talking there about thousands of applications, right? I'm talking about one day.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the ACT stuff. So, I mean, Ben, why don't you tee that up a little bit, because you're going through the various different types of things that you're up to there.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to do is, as soon as I've figured out where is a good sort of starting point, and it's going to be different, right, across your organization and who you are and that sort of stuff. Ultimately, you just want to be able to act on the things that you've learned about. So if that's a compliance problem, if that's a quality problem, if that's something to do with you haven't got environments that are sort of up to task or whatever, essentially you need a really good sort of Swiss Army knife of things, of capabilities that you can do, that can scale, and that you can then provide people. So most I think organizations that we talk to and work with just want the right data. That's what they're after. And that sounds very straightforward, but actually without doing that discovery piece, and then without some pretty robust software, it's very hard just to get your hands on something that's meaningful, that's sort of good enough quality to actually pass or fail your tests for the right reasons and so on and so forth, or develop against, or quite often, if you want a series of environments that are more aligned to dev, undoubtedly the data is not going to exist in production, right? So you've got to go and think, well, how am I going to get it? How am I going to support, multiple Scrum teams, hopefully multiple test teams as well, that actually they can do their job and that they can kind of go and do this. And this ultimately is what ACT is around. ACT is around acting intelligently on what you've learned about, and then providing multiple ways for teams to work, because everyone works slightly differently. And some people want data right up front. Some teams want it last minute. Some teams need it to pass through multiple applications and processes. And so I think from our perspective, it's something we've really sort of thought about over the last while, which is how can we make those acts very straightforward, and very sort of self-service, but also give some people a real kind of Swiss Army knife of stuff that they can kind of go and do and dig into and build some very potentially, complex cross-environment, cross-database, cross-system data generation tasks or something like that. But it's really about, can you, based on what you learn, go and do that, and then of course keep up with the rate of change. I don't know how you do that without software. I don't think it's possible with the sort of scale that we see at most enterprise
bodies and a wing and a prayer, basically, for the most part.
For sure.
Well, a lot of hacking, I think. There's a lot of hacking goes on. I mean, developers will quickly knock up a little bit of data to test one or two if statements, but once you start building anything, with 20 different decision gates and a few integration points, it becomes way too complicated. I mean, in terms of the Swiss Army knife, just to kind of, the types of things we do, snapshot compare is really useful, because you can just snapshot, put something to the front end and find out what the data is in the back end, and you go, oh, brilliant, good. Now I know what's actually happening. Goes back to a bit of discovery, but it's really good for being able to then create new data, because you're actually creating all the tables, including the GLs, which you didn't even know existed. It's also posting a message to Kafka, and that Kafka message then gets picked up by another team. Subsetting. Now, subsetting is fine for initial setup where you've got millions of rows and you just want to have, say, 20, maybe this month orders on top of my standard reference tables. That's fine. The one that I think that is kind of much misunderstood is cloning. Now, cloning is so useful. So usually, if you get some kind of bug, it's never in the environment that you're in. I'm just doing one at the moment, and it's actually in another environment. Great. So usually it's a production or a pre-prod bug. So this ability to clone the actual essence of the data, but you don't care about the technicalities. The technicalities are the indexes, the identity columns, and all those types of things, managing the foreign keys. So this ability to suck something out, and also it may well have changed in terms of you may have extra columns in your QA2 environment from your QA3 environment. That ability to clone data out so you can then recreate that bug. And also say, well, actually, that's a really rare type of occurrence. A good one is long chain history. We've got lots of histories, and I'm trying to kind of build better dashboards, a better business intelligence. Give me 20,000 of them. So this idea to clone them out. Now, how do you do that cloning? If it's database to database, if it's a message structure, absolutely easy for us. We just know the structures. We'd say build a clone, and all we need to do is just point it and say we know what the primary keys are from anyway, and we fix those. You may well actually have already some stuff you do already. You might have some automation scripts. If you built automation tends to interact via the APIs or through the front end. Just chuck them into the party and say, well, actually, if we're going to clone this out, we're actually going to have to put some extra information into my target system or my reference system to make sure that we have those brokers or those broker codes available in that system as well. So being quite flexible about solving that problem. But it also means that the problems just take a reasonable amount of time. You should be able to knock something up in either a couple of hours to maybe 2 or 3 days for the more complicated ones. Now, that's acceptable in a sprint. You don't really have time to go off and say, well, it's going to take me 3 months to get all this integrated data together. Synthetic data, you have to be really sophisticated and really powerful. From the end consumer point of view, that would be, let's just say, a business analyst or maybe an expert user who wants to create a certain type of scenario. It has to be in business terminology, so the mapping from the technical to the business. Measuring coverage, being able to analyze that coverage and then say, well, these are the attributes to care about, and we're actually building a much richer set of coverage within that. The other one is finding data. We're actually working on some really clever stuff, which will come out hopefully sort of the end of Q1, which is actually being able to be much more sophisticated about how you find that data. Because data is, you can't just find data from one database anymore, and even if you could, it's probably, as you saw from the SAP system, it's just incredible the number of joins and things you'd have to do that. It's got to be pretty technically good to do that. This again is where AI can really help, because it helps you to parse those queries and kind of hunt for them. But you're also going to have to think about doing that across different heterogeneous systems. And we've just added in a whole new layer in the product where we can go and basically federate join from multiple systems, so that when you're looking for data, you're actually looking for data in my target systems, which could be the accounts payable, the accounts receivable, and maybe our homegrown reconciliation system. And I'm testing the reconciliation system. You need to be able to join those three up to be able to say, okay, this is the account that has those attributes that I care about, that I want to test this dashboard, or I'm going to need to release this new close account feature, and I need to make sure all those bits are there. Build a federated view of your target systems. Bingo. That before would have been, it's guesswork, utter guesswork. So I think some of that kind of acting now, we've, over the last probably 3 years, we've built up a lot of those, as well as you customers will already have your own as well. So let's incorporate those into the party.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just listening to you there, Huw. I was talking to a partner a couple of weeks now, and a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying how they're seeing a lot of enterprises go back to setting up kind of central test data teams. And I was like, okay, like we're kind of seeing the same, but I wanted to kind of quiz them a bit and understand, what are they seeing in the industry? And they came back and they said a lot of this is down to the adoption of AI and the various AI initiatives that enterprises are trying to roll out. So we dug a little bit deeper into that, and a lot of it just came back to joining up data. That was really the key. Because if you look at a lot of these AI initiatives, actually, it doesn't make sense in silos. What use is just like, obviously there's going to be some value, but it's going to be very limited if you're just training it on one data source. If you look across the enterprise where there's thousands of applications, actually that's a multidisciplinary strategy. It's a multidisciplinary approach that needs to happen. You need to join up this data. That data needs to be made available to the data teams, to the people who are running these AI initiatives, right? And that's really the key. And I think that's a central approach, but you have to have capabilities to join up data as well, right?
So let's just quickly talk about the monitor stuff, because James, you've been involved with that heavily, I think, in terms of, Ben, you could just give a nice example of me doing my job, upgrading something. So James, you've been kind of heavily involved with a lot of the sort of monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, this has kind of been my baby, I guess, for a couple of months, but I think we've all, between us three and many other people in the company, we've been kind of exploring this idea for at least the past kind of 12 to 18 months, right? And I think really it comes down to what I was saying at the beginning, once you've discovered data, which has historically has not been a simple process. You look at a lot of teams, they'll go in and they'll start to audit different parts of the organization, do various interviews, go into various environments, open them up. It can take weeks or months to go and actually discover one part of the organization, right? Obviously, AI is helping with that, which is fantastic. But as soon as you've done that discovery exercise, it is immediately out of date. You might as well rip it up because the databases have changed, the applications have evolved, everything just changes so quickly in the world of IT at the moment, right? So with monitoring, really, it's this capability where you can connect into a system and then you are continuously scanning that. As soon as data changes, as soon as tables change, new columns are introduced, we have triggers in there that can detect that. And then we can notify stakeholders based off of it, right? So that's kind of phase one, understand what has changed, notify people about those changes. But then step 2, 3, 4, 5, and everything beyond that is really let's do stuff with that information. Firstly, let's go and rescan it. Is this data that's been added sensitive, right? Let's go and use AI to see if we can do some clever things, like can we create some SQLs in business language, some lookups, some finds, which actually allow business users to come in and start to understand what data exists, right? And really, I keep coming back to this mission statement: connect to database, understand it, with all this cleverness, and then continuously keep on top of it. And that's really the mission statement, right? And monitoring, I think, is absolutely key to this. Without that, I've no idea if you're on a central team how you would solve this problem, right?
I mean, what you're really kind of doing here is you're kind of building a kind of auto documentation into the process. So you've added in 5 extra columns and 3 extra tables. It's going through in a normal sprint release. At what stage is anyone ever going to go back and actually document that from a technical documentation and also business documentation? Whereas we know it's happened, we know it's changed. There's going to be a spec in there somewhere. As long as we add that spec into the AI search, we can actually auto-document that. So that email that goes out to people saying that we've added these things in. If you've introduced modeling as well in terms of what's this, why is this here, and what's this effect on the static data, because you're now introducing some kind of new process. If you model that model description actually is giving you all of your test cases, your user journeys, and all that kind of stuff. So you're just by using a few little tools, which you have to use anyway, which you've already sort of done, you're building all of that lovely juice, which is then, as opposed to having to go back and treat that as a separate thing. Let's just build that into the process. And AI really can help with that. But you've just got to be, as you say, previously I used to bang on about you have to do a lot up front. Now with AI, you've got to do a little bit up front. And you've just got to do a little bit of verification, really, that this is correct. You might say, well, that's close, but no cigar. We'll just change a few things and push it on. So I think that's absolutely massive. And then, I mean, you could also do things like, I mean, we're actually doing stuff with Oracle's got a great thing, shared SQL area. So we're actually looking at the SQL that's running through, looking for potential business joins, which then may well bubble up into something which is useful for the user to use as a business query insight into what's actually going inside, rather than them trying to cast some queries because it's already in the code.
It's interesting because I think just coming back to what's happening in a lot of organizations now, I think the era of growth at all costs is over, right? Every organization has tightened budgets. Everyone's trying to do more with less. And I think to your point there, Huw, this is really an enabler of how you can be more effective while being more lean, do more with less, right? And that's the key. I know we're tight on time here, but I do just want to finish up on one piece before we go, which is all of those free capabilities joined together, the discover, act, monitor, because I think that's really the key bit behind the platform, right? And behind where we Curiosity are going. And I think if you look at the test data industry as general, just looking at, the market, all the tools that exist, everyone is so obsessed with this act phase. It's all about, let's go and mask some data, let's go and synthetically generate data. But I think the key bit here is once you wrap that around the whole ecosystem, which is why we've launched this framework, you can come in, you can discover the data, which is absolutely critical. If you don't understand the data, you don't have anything. You're just blindly walking around in the dark. You can then act on that appropriately, and then you can monitor it so you're constantly keeping up to date, right? So I think each of these free bits have value by themselves, but really that is the entire platform. Once you have those free capabilities, if you're a central team, you can do anything. You can walk into any project, any team across the organization and, be pretty confident that you're going to be successful and add a lot of value, right?
Yeah, I would say if you're not doing it, if your current sort of approach is less than what we've spoken about here, it's a real opportunity for some value, some serious value, and actually, it's not that hard. That's a good thing. Like, there's been a ton of work put in to make this really straightforward, and so there's opportunities.
I want to buy.
Look like a look like a hero and a heroine.
Exactly. Gents, any final thoughts before we close it down?
No, I'm good.
Where can we learn more?
Really good.
Oh, you can learn. Well, so look, if this is something that has piqued your interest, I would say feel free. So James is always on LinkedIn, so make sure you follow James. Huw is also as the godfather of test data, also on LinkedIn, but otherwise come through the website, come through to Curiosity Software. We've got a webinar on the horizon, and honestly, just reach out. We'd love to show you off the software if people are interested in seeing how this works in a bit more detail. And otherwise, Huw, James, thank you for joining, and look forward to what the rest of 2025's got to hold. There's a lot of work to go.
Thank you, everyone.